Hey everybody, what's going on? Hellmite here, bringing you another video from Grab the Lantern today. Today I wanted to talk about the voting poll winners that were announced over the weekend. Of course, I'm talking about the winner of the VGU poll and the winner of the skinline update poll, whatever you want to call it. I don't quite remember the name of it now, but that poll exactly. So I generally want to cover not only who won, but also my general thoughts about what Riot can do to make the winners actually feel like they are sort of worthy of the crown that they've gotten, and how they can actually make these the character in particular feel particularly good. And of course, I'm talking about Skarner as the winner of our VGU poll. Many thanks to the Scorpion. But before I talk too much about Skarner, I do have to address the elephant in the room. I cannot believe Shyvana got second place again. She beat Skarner out in the previous poll on the Udyr poll, so I'm like so confused as to why she lost to Skarner this time. But all that said, it was really nice for Riot to address her bridesmaid syndrome and to basically say, we'll strongly consider her for the next VGU. Obviously, this doesn't mean that she is guaranteed for the next VGU. It just means that when they come up next to choose someone to VGU, Shyvana is more likely than not going to be it. Now, moving on to Skarner. I really think that Skarner is interesting because from a kit perspective, there's so many things that Riot need to fix. And they basically confirmed we're throwing out almost every single ability on his kit, besides keeping some form of his iconic kidnapping ultimate. And I think that makes total sense. Realistically, there are no gameplay mechanics that Skarner has that really grab you and force you to pay attention. The Crystal Spire's passive is kind of neat the first time you see it, and then you kind of realize, oh, so Skarner's only powerful here, and everywhere else he's not strong at all, and that just makes him feel uninteresting. He's a very stat-sticky type champion. He runs at you, he presses all of his buttons, he has an on-demand shield, a movement speed steroid, an attack speed steroid, right? There's a lot of things that Skarner just kind of gets for free, and there isn't then an interesting engagement when Skarner gets you. He basically runs you down and spams Q until eventually you die, and that's not fun at all. Now, part of this is because of how powerful Impale is, especially being a targeted ability. One can think back to when Warwick's ultimate was a targeted suppress, right, and how strong that was, and Skarner's in a very similar state in this regard. Obviously, Skarner has to get closer in order to ult you, but he also has the ability of pulling you out of position with that ultimate compared to a Malzahar suppress or the old Warwick suppress. So, in that regard, Impale was definitely taking up a lot of Skarner's power budget. I think with some very small tweaks, Riot can reduce the amount of power budget that Impale is taking, honestly. If you make it a very short-ranged skill shot with a bit of a wind-up on the animation, you can really make it so that enemy champions can see it and can react to it and potentially dodge it, and the Skarner then has to aim his ultimate fairly decently in order to make sure he can adjust for enemy movement and enemy jukes. And in that regard, then because his ultimate is less reliable, you have a lot more power to add into the remainder of Skarner's kit. I think Riot could take Skarner in a couple of different directions here. They could either lean in more towards the Vanguard, Initiator, Tank type character, or go more towards the sort of juggernauty DPS, get in the middle of a fight and whack people with your claws kind of play that Skarner already sort of has. I'm leaning towards the Vanguard. I feel like that works better with Skarner's ultimate. If Skarner was supposed to be a Juggernaut, I feel like Impale is sort of at odds with that, and we know Impale's like the only thing that's staying, but I think you could make it work either way. I do feel like there's the potential for a maybe burrowing theme, similar to Rek'Sai, but sort of shorter range. If Skarner ducks underground and dashes real quick through the dirt and then pops up for sort of a dash and knock up kind of thing, I can maybe see something like that happen because the Brackern were all buried underground, and that sort of thing would aid Skarner in sort of a Vanguard type playstyle where he can go in, knock somebody up, grab a guy, and then pull him backwards. There are a couple of different things you could do there. Again, I think Vanguard is more likely. Either way, though, I hope that Riot play up Skarner's Scorpion-like nature more. I think his older kit really didn't sort of say, this is a character with claws and a scorpion tail. He just threw random projectiles and did random AoE damage around him, and there wasn't a lot to really say, this is a scorpion. So I would like to see Riot play that up a little bit more. And speaking of is a Scorpion, let's talk a little bit about Skarner from a thematic perspective. I know Riot said, oh, Crystalline Scorpion is a generic fantasy trope, and we don't want to do that, but I think they're actually straight up wrong. I can't think of literally any other crystal scorpion in fantasy media. Giant scorpions, sure, those are a dime a dozen, but a crystal giant scorpion, that's unique, that's really cool, and that's something that I hope Riot preserve when they go to rework Skarner. I don't want the Brackern to be anything other than a race of giant crystal scorpions. That's cool, and the fact that they're all sentient just makes it cooler, right? If they were to make Skarner not crystalline and just say he's a giant scorpion, then he's generic. if they do some other things to the Brackern to make them just a generic race of crystal creatures, I think that would be generally disappointing. I think Skarner is a cool scorpion, and he should stay a cool scorpion. And the funny thing about Skarner as well is that there's really not a lot that Riot have to do to change his lore in order to make him fit with the universe as written. Skarner actually has the potential to be one of the biggest movers and shakers in the Piltover and Zaun evolving storyline right now, which is hilarious, right? Because we had Arcane, and Arcane focused a lot on the Hex Crystals and the pioneering of Hex Tech and all this stuff, and Skarner's people lie at the center of this, because Hex Crystals are literally like what contain the souls of Brackern. And in Skarner's lore, right, Piltoverans came out to Skarner's people's resting ground and basically dug up a bunch of Brackern and stole their Hex Crystals before Skarner eventually woke up and killed them or drove them off, and now Skarner's trying to chase down and recover these stolen Hex Crystals from his people. And this event is also what caused the Zaun Grey, because once Piltover realized we couldn't get natural Hex Crystals anymore, they had to come up with ways to artificially synthesize them, and the process of synthesizing Hex Crystals creates the Zaun Grey, or is at least a heavy contributor to the Zaun Grey, and this means that there are so many characters that Skarner has theoretical interactions with, right? Seraphine can at least hear the song of the Brackern from Hex Crystals. Even if she doesn't recognize what it is, she can hear it and sort of communicate in that regard. Camille's family were the ones who discovered the Hex Crystals and were the ones who exploited it for as long as they possibly could before Skarner eventually drove them all off. Jason Victor, the sort of pioneers of Hextech, they had no idea what they were working with at the time, and I think that they would be honestly traumatized to find out exactly what they were doing and what they were using for their inventions. This gets a little into tricky territory because of Jason Victor having slightly different backstories in Arcane versus in the current League of Legends canon. So, but either way, the general plot thread here of Jace invents Hextech using a crystal that he doesn't know what it is or what it does or where it comes from, like, that's still a thing, no matter which sort of canon you look at, so I think you can generally make it work in a way that is satisfying to both halves of the story. But either way, this means that Skarner is a big deal, and if Skarner were to arrive in Piltover, for example, his arrival would ask a lot of questions all of a sudden of the city that's prided itself on progress, where that progress is built on the backs of basically dead sentient creatures, which is like really crazy. So Riot doesn't need to rewrite anything about Skarner. They have nothing to rewrite in terms of his lore. And I think that as far as his voiceover goes, while I'm fine with Skarner still being a bit more of a mopey, tragic character, I think that Riot could stand to give him the Galio treatment, right? Galio was another character who was very solemn and very sad and very tragic, but that was all he ever talked about. And when Riot did their rework on Galio, he has a lot more range in his emotions. We see Galio being curious, or being angry, or being cheerful, or being the himbo that he is, right? And that he still has the tragic moments. He still has some lines where you realize, oh, he's really sad about this particular thing, and he generally has sort of a tragic story in general, right? This is a giant who was created to fight magic and who can only come alive in the presence of magic. Otherwise, he's stuck there standing on a statue watching the people he's supposed to protect. And so, in that regard, you don't lose that angle on Galio, you just added more, and I feel like that's where Riot need to take Skarner. I feel like he shouldn't ever move away from this, last survivor of his kind types, character, but I think that you can add more variety to what he's talking about and what he's doing and generally where his personality is at. I think that would be the only thing Riot would really have to do to rework his voice lines. I really don't think you need to change anything else besides that. That's it for Skarner. Let's go ahead and talk about the skinline VGU poll winner, which is the Gothic update. I don't think I have much of a dog in this race, honestly, you guys. I think all three concepts were pretty boring, and I really don't know how any of them get better. But with Gothic, at least, I think Riot have a couple of different approaches that they can use to really revitalize this skinline. I think the first thing they could do is to lean into the fantasy of the new Gothic Annie splash art, which is basically, goth characters who summon demons to do their bidding. This is what I'm calling the patented high noon approach. Just add demons to any skin line, and all of a sudden it's more interesting than it was before. But this would totally work, right? It kind of fits in with the theming of it. I think there are some interesting things you could do. It would feel very much so like Blood Moon, where you have the cultists and then the actual demons as your sort of champion skins. But I think it gets close enough that it would probably work overall. The other way you could do this is to basically pull a debonair and essentially say, if you have a Gothic skin, you're a fancy character in an ornate Gothic fashion with some small amount of storytelling detailing why you dress this way and what kind of a world you live in. I think you could put them in the fancy clothes universe alongside Debonair and Crime City Nightmare if you really needed to do that. That would totally be a thing that would work out. Apparently, Riot has a fetish for putting champions in fancy clothes, given that we got Crime City Nightmare and Debonair, and then more Withered and Crystal Rose basically back to back to back, so Gothic fits right in with that trend. So this is, I think, probably the more likely approach than the other one I talked about before, but I'm kind of aiming more towards the former than the latter, because I think the former is much more interesting. Finally, Riot could go more casual, as with the current Imumu skin line, right, where it's basically characters that are literally dressing as just like goth teenagers. I probably, Riot aren't going to take this approach, though, since players tend to gravitate more towards serious skin universes, and because that's kind of where goth already is it's just your champion, but wearing goth fashion, and there's no storytelling behind that. So that's unlikely, but it is still potentially a possibility, especially given that we don't have very many lighthearted skin lines left anymore, and so potentially Riot try to keep it the same, but I would guess probably the first two are one of the directions Riot would take it in, and of the two, I think the first is more interesting. So anyways, that is going to be it for me today, guys. Thank you all so very much for watching. Let me know what you think of the Skarner VGU, especially. I'm excited to hear what you guys have to think about it, especially if you play a lot of Skarner. I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments. If you enjoyed the video today, go ahead and leave it a like. And if you really enjoyed the video, consider subscribing. I upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days as well. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it. And I'll talk to you all later.